Hello and welcome to this particular edition of the CBSE Class 12 English course, in which we are going to deal with the explanation of the first chapter in the Flamingo textbook, which is called the last lesson. The first chapter is called the last lesson. The first lesson is called the last lesson. It's written by Alphonse Daudet. Okay, that's how it's pronounced in English. In French, T is silent. Daudet and Daudet. Okay, that's how it is pronounced. I checked it multiple times. Okay, so he was a French writer who actually died pretty young at the age of 57. A French novelist and short story writer. The last lesson is set in the days of the Franco-Prussian War. I'm going to tell you a lot about the history. It's a very fascinating kind of a story. The last lesson is set in the days of the Franco-Prussian War, 1870-71, in which France was defeated by Prussia, led by Bismarck. Okay, Prussia then consisted of what are now the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. In this story, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have passed into Prussian hands. Read the story to find out what effect this had on life at school. Okay, now before we start, let me tell you, he was always known for writing something extremely sentimental and emotional about life in south of France. The story is set as it says Franco-Prussian War 1870-71, when France was defeated by Prussia, led by Bismarck. Okay, now what is the difference between Germany and Prussia? Now Germany is a modern nation. Okay, before that it was a multitude of states and it was known as Prussia, and as the note says, included Germany, modern day Germany, parts of Poland, parts of Austria also. What's the backdrop of the story? The French districts of Alsace and Lorraine, which you would have read in class 10 in the Treaty of Versailles. Before the Treaty of Versailles, uska background kya hai? Basically, that these French districts went to Prussia. These are like, if you know the geography of, in fact, that is here, that we will come to because it's written in the book also. Like if this is France and this is Germany, Alsace and Lorraine are somewhere here. So they are on the border between Germany and France. Okay, so they have gone into Prussian hands after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, which is why in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, France wanted Alsace and Lorraine given back by Germany. Remember, so that was the kind of historical background to that particular demand in 1919 after the First World War. So they are to the east of Paris on the German border. What is the story about that you need to know about? The story essentially is that one's language, the language we speak, is rooted to one's own identity. My identity comes from the language that I speak. If Tamil is my mother tongue, that's my identity. If your mother tongue is Bengali, that is your identity. If your mother tongue is Hindi, that is your identity. So our language becomes our own identity. We take great pride in speaking our mother tongue. Okay. What is happening in this particular story is that there is an attempt being made to slowly break the ties, to sever the ties between people and their language. Because once that ties are broken, you make an entire group of people lose their basic cultural identity. Okay, that is what the attempt that is being made out here. So on this particular day, what it shows is the attempt being made by people to reinforce their connect with their mother tongue, which is French, because this happens in the towns of Alsace and Lorraine. So it is basically a very powerful reminder, okay, of the fact that we cannot take our language for granted. We just think, oh, this is something which you have learned to speak from the time we were infants, so that's pretty okay. But we need to take steps to ensure that we protect this language, the linguistic identity and the cultural identity of the entire group of people. And it is important to love and also learn one's language in order to protect our individual and collective identity. Okay, all this I've written, but these are important words which you should use in your answers, especially the long format answers. Okay, it's also an emotional reminder that one should not put off learning. There is also patriotism, a patriotic appeal in the story. The teacher is definitely not a cardboard kind of a character. You feel for his grief because he's leaving that particular school after working there for 40 long years, right? So that was his home for 40 years. So he does feel very aggrieved at having to leave that particular place. So what are the basically the broad themes of this story? One, the change is disturbing. A major change is happening in those two towns out there. There is uncertainty about that change. There is nostalgia for the past. And suddenly you realize that, array, we should have learned our language. So there is a sense of lament. There is a sense of, fact that we lost out by not learning our language. There is a backdrop of the war. There's the backdrop of the presence of the German, the Prussian forces. And also what I just now said, the importance of one's identity and the importance of the language, the pride in one's language, and what happens when you get uprooted and displaced from your roots. कि आपको उखाड़ के कहीं से आप किसी पौधे को उखाड़ के कहीं और डाल देते हैं, तो उसका what is the impact of that? You are completely uprooting something. You're virtually killing that particular organism, right? That's what happens when you are uprooted from your own cultural and linguistic identity. Okay, so that is what happens, and which is why you see a lot of this language wars. Why people in Tamil Nadu protest the fact that Hindi is being imposed on them, right? So they feel that it's an attempt to denigrate Tamil. Okay, when the All India language examinations, different competitive examinations, even recently there is a protest going on. They are held in English and Hindi and not in the local language. So someone from back of beyond in Tamil Nadu or in Karnataka would be more comfortable in taking that examination in a Tamil or a Kannada as opposed to a Hindi or English, right? So you need to give them those opportunities. Language cannot be the basis, on which you kind of consider the merit of a person. Language is a means of communication, right? Be it any language. So that's what the story essentially kind of reinforces. Let's get started. Oof. Oh, sorry. Now, this story is being narrated by a child, and that's something very important. It's not being related by an adult, so it is from the point of view of a small school-going child. So it gives you that kind of a feel. I started for school very late that morning and was in great dread of a scolding. That is, I feared that I would be scolded, especially because M. Hamel, who is the teacher out there, the French teacher, had said that he would question us on participles, and I did not know the first word about them. Participles, great dread essentially means that he was scared and apprehensive of something bad that would happen to him. Participles is a verb form that can be used as an adjective. For example, burnt toast or working woman. Working is like a verb form, right? But it can be used as an adjective. Same is the case with burnt toast, right? So he did not know anything about them. For a moment, I thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. It was so warm, so bright. The birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and in the open field back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. Sawmill is something where, work related to wood cutting, etc. takes place, where logs or wood are cut into planks and they can be used for carpentry kind of purposes or to use in furniture or in railway compartments, etc. It was all much more tempting than the rule for participles. So all this that he's describing out here obviously is much more exciting than learning participles. But I had the strength to resist and hurried off to school. That is, he resisted the temptation to keep looking at all these more beautiful sights of the birds and the fields and the sawmill and the Prussian soldiers. When I passed this town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. The bulletin board is important. I've written question and answers on that also. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. So the bulletin board was a harbinger of bad news. The lost battles, that is the French which had lost the battle, so that news had also been put up on the bulletin board. The draft, the orders of the commanding officer, and I thought to myself without stopping, what can be the matter now? So because he knows that it always brings bad news in the last 2 years that had been there, his experience. Then as I hurried by as fast as I could go, the blacksmith The blacksmith Vector, who was there with his apprentice is someone who is like an intern, reading the bulletin, called after me, "Don't go so fast, bub. You will get to your school in plenty of time." Bub is essentially a slang term for a male friend. Okay, many of these words even I was not familiar with. "You will get to your school in plenty of time." I thought he was making fun of me, and I reached M. Hamel's little garden all out of breath. So he has virtually made it at the last minute. So he just described the sights and sound and the people who he meets on his way to school. Usually when school began, there was a great bustle, which could be heard out in the street, the opening and the closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison. In unison means together, very loud, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. That would be the usual sight and sound of the school. But that day was different. But now it was all so still. So still meaning it was all so quiet. I had counted on the commotion. Commotion mean of the general, kolahal masta hoga, lot of noise, to get to my desk without being seen. But of course, that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning at the church when the father is kind of giving his discourse, the Sunday address, the sermon, when everyone is quiet and listening. So this was as quiet as on a Sunday morning. Through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places, and M. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. So terrible iron ruler means that he dreaded that iron ruler, because obviously it shows that that iron ruler, उस iron ruler का इस्तेमाल किया गया था बच्चों को मारने के लिए, possibly, right? I had to, और डराने के लिए. I had to open the door and go in before everybody. You can imagine how I blushed and how frightened I was. So terrible, frightened. So it gives you a sense of the personality of M. Hamel, right? So M. Hamel is an important personality. Please make a note of all these words. But nothing happened. Hamel saw me and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you." That, if you had not come, we would have actually started the lesson without you actually coming to the class. I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not till then, when I had got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat. So what was M. Hamel wearing? He was wearing his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection. When someone from outside will come to inspect the school, that's when he would wear this very nice attire. So it was a surprise that he was wearing it on this particular day. And prize days, the prize distribution days. So those were the special days on which M. Hamel would actually wear this particular attire. ये तीनों attire में जो तीन चीजें हैं ना, the cap, the shirt, and the coat. Please remember the color and everything. Okay. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. Solemn means very serious, and as though something very serious kind of stuff was happening on that particular day. But the thing that surprised me most was to see, please remember this because this can come as a 2-mark question, was on the back benches that were always empty. The village people were sitting quietly like ourselves. Old Hauser with his 3-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several others besides. So that was something very surprising on that particular day, that normally the last benches would be empty. But on that particular day, in fact, on YouTube, you would find a movie which has been made on this particular, the last lesson. You could have a look at it. It's an old black and white kind of a movie, but it would give you some kind of a visual context, if you please. Okay. So all these people were sitting on the last benches. They were not students. They were villagers from that particular village. Okay. In Alsace. Everybody looked sad, and Hauser had brought an old primer thumbed at the edges. You will see it in this particular illustration. Now, primer is a first textbook, okay, of reading. I have a feeling I interpreted it wrongly in the YouTube video. Is a first textbook of reading, and thumbed at the edges indicates that it was very old. Okay, when you take a book and you kind of do it many times. Okay, I don't do such things. So it kind of, the top edges become, they fold ho jata hai. So they have been thumbed many times, either the top right or the bottom right, right? So it is the first textbook that you use for reading. So that is what so it shows the kind of illiteracy as far as the French language is concerned, even though these people are all French. and he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. While I was wondering about it all, M. Hamel mounted his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone, grave means serious, gentle tone. So it's almost like, two different kind of emotions being used in the same sense, which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. He is not named. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." So he says the order had come from Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, that only German is to be taught in these two territories, which are now Prussian territory, not French territory. So the attempt is to uproot them from the French language and force them to learn German. So the teacher who's going to teach German is going to arrive tomorrow, which means today is the last lesson for French. So I would want you to be attentive. What a thunderclap these words were to me. Thunderclap is like a big jolt, a shock to Franz and to the other students, obviously. Oh, the wretches. So he's almost like abusing them. Okay. And now he realizes that, this is what would have been put on that bulletin board, which everyone was reading while he was coming to school in a hurry. Okay. That was what they had put up at the town hall. My last French lesson. Why I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there then, because he thinks that अबे आगे जाके पढ़ना ही नहीं है. So what is the point of doing even this last French lesson? Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lesson. So he's also feeling sorry that he did not learn French. For seeking birds' eggs, for going sliding on the Saar. Saar is the major river in Germany. I have been on a cruise on the Saar some 20 years ago. My books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints were old friends now that I couldn't give up. So suddenly, it's like, when you are told that, you don't have to learn this anymore, you feel a bit of a nostalgia. अरे बड़ा मजा आता था. जब तक पढ़ना होता था तब मजा नहीं आता था. जब पढ़ने को छोड़ देते थे तब मजा आता था. So it's like that kind of a tendency. So very realistic kind of picturization of that little student's character. And M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and about how cranky he was. He was a bit of a temperamental kind of a character. So that's what Franz is talking about Hamel. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, and now I understand why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. Why were all the villagers also sitting like students in that particular class? It was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our master for his 40 years of faithful service. Keywords: 40 years of faithful service, and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. This line is very important because it talks about an individual, that they felt sorry for this gentleman. It's also their way of feeling sorry for their country, because they no longer belong to France, they belong to Prussia. So these lines, it was their way of thanking our master for his 40 years of faithful service and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. This line is extremely important. Please make a note of it. While I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. Hamel is calling out his name. It was my turn to recite. Okay. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle all through? So he's being asked about the participles. We know it from the first paragraph itself that he had no idea. He did not have the foggiest idea about what those participle rules were. Very loud and clear and without one mistake. But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. Like, he's sitting there, his heart is beating very fast and he's not looking up. He doesn't want to make eye contact with the teacher. I heard M. Hamel say to me, I'm feeling tired. I heard M. Hamel say to me, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, wow, I have plenty of time. So he's kind of not scolding him, but he's making him feel very bad about the fact that he could not tell the rules. He says, I will not scold you, But that kind of a line is worse than actually a scolding. When you are kind of embarrassing the student, you know that you have made a mistake, but I will not scold you because you also know what is the problem, right? See how it is. You must feel bad enough. Every day we have said to ourselves, हर दिन हम सोचते हैं कि I have plenty of time. बहुत time है, बाद में पढ़ लेंगे. There are many people there, no, like who will write on the day before the examination. Legends reading this 1 hour before the examination. According to me, वो legends नहीं है, सबसे बड़े बेवकूफ हैं. Who are trying to, and मैं कहता हूँ कि वो line, वो comment YouTube पे लिखने के लिए you wasted another 5 to 10 seconds. Oof. I have plenty of time. I will learn it tomorrow. So we keep putting it off to tomorrow. What you should actually do today. Okay. Kal kare jo aaj kar. Am I getting it right? So aaj kare so ab. Right? And now you see where we have come out. That's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Alsace puts off learning till tomorrow. Important line. Please mark it with a pencil in your book. Now, those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, how is it you pretend to be Frenchmen? The Prussians will tell you, you pretend to be Frenchmen, but किस तरह के Frenchmen हो, घंटा तुमको language भी ठीक से लिखना नहीं आता है. That will be the kind of contempt they will have for you. That will be the kind of jibe that they will pass at you. They will be sarcastic with you. And yet you can neither speak nor write your own language. But you are not the worst, poor little France. We have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with. We all have made a mistake. You are not the only one, France. So he's kind of including everyone while talking about France. France. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to. So he's now blaming the parents as well. They prefer to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as have a little more money. So child labor. And I have been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? So he's blaming himself also. And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? That is, I did not take classes because I wanted to go fishing, or I sent you to water my plants, or the parents made you work on the farm or at the sawmill. Right? So everyone is to blame. So it's a collective failure in which Hamel rather graciously includes himself as well. Then from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying it was the most beautiful. Okay, this is the map, which is not very clear. This is France, this is Prussia or Germany, and this is where it comes. Okay. You have it in your books, which you can see. French is the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us and never forget it, because when a people are enslaved, this paragraph, mark it, my students, it's very important. As long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. Aisa hai ki, the language is like the chabi to your prison if you are enslaved. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. So on the last day, France is able to understand it. Abhi tak nahi sunta tha because sunne ki ichha nahi thi. He was not interested in listening. But on the last day, he's okay about listening to it because he wants to learn it. There is an emotional connect, a sentimental connect that he feels with the teacher and the lesson that he is teaching on that last day at the school. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think too that I had never listened so carefully and that he had never explained everything with so much of patience. So he's blaming himself, he's blaming the teacher also. That Hamel, who was cranky, did not show much patience earlier, and this time I also listened to it much more carefully. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away. वो बोलते हैं ना swan song, last match का innings century मार के जाओ, because he want people should remember my last innings, right? Before going away, and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us written in a beautiful round hand. France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desk. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. So he gave a lesson in writing and everyone was doing it very, very meticulously. The only sound was the scratching of the pens. This is a very beautiful line. When it is absolutely pin drop silence, you can actually hear the scratching of the pens on paper, right? And these little details is what makes this story very beautiful, written by Alphonse Daudet. Once some beetles blew in, the insects, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. So he's describing very little things, what the little children are doing. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? This line is important. It can come as a standalone line. And what does he mean? He's being sarcastic. Will the German forces, the Prussian forces, make the pigeons also coo in German? या वो फ्रेंच में कू कर सकते हैं, as though they know the French or the German language. But he's being sarcastic. He's being a little, tongue in cheek about this. That whole thing. If we have occupied, now you will have to learn our language. That authority that the Germans, the Prussians, are exercising over the people of these two territories. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom, that he wanted to see, and he wanted to kind of capture almost on his mind's camera how something looks so that he can remember it later on. Remember that poem by Wordsworth, Daffodils, in which he remembers the sight of the daffodils even later on when he's in a pensive mood, he's able to recall it and feel good. Similarly, he wants to capture every sight in that particular school where he had spent 40 years so that it would be captured in the camera of his mind. Fancy. For 40 years, he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window. So that is something which he had kind of cultivated, and his class in front of him. Just like that, only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hopvine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart, that it must have kind of shattered him to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, which means that he also lived in the same school premises. His house, his room was on top of that particular classroom, and his sister was packing his goods, their trunks, for they must leave the country the next day. So it's almost immediately they will need to leave that part of the country, which was no longer under the occupation of the French forces, but move to the other part of real France. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the babies chanted their ba ba, bee, bow, boo. Down, it's just saying the babies. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. That is, it's almost, they are learning from the very basics, the ABCD of French. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion. It was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. How well I remember it, that last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12, then the Angelus. Now, this particular thing I'll need to explain to you. Angelus is a prayer. Okay. It says, at the same time, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. So you see the contrast of the prayer and the soldiers. It's like, peace. Prayers convey peace. The soldiers convey war. So both of them kind of coexisting around the school premises. Hamel stood up very pale in his chair, very weak looking. I never saw him so tall. So this is kind of, I never saw him so tall. It could kind of convey either a literal sense that, when he stood, it was from this angle because this is a small child. Also, the respect for him in the eyes of France and other students had also gone up. So tall could also mean in a metaphorical kind of sense. My friend said but something choked. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France, which essentially means long live France. Okay. It also shows that he was very emotional, but at the same time extremely dignified on the last day. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed, you may go. The school is dismissed, essentially in a literal sense means school khatam ho gaya, you may go. The other thing is that, this last lesson is over. This school, as far as I'm concerned, is done. So it is dismissed. So with that, we end. I've written a whole lot of question and answers for this particular chapter. Please go through it. Once you have the explanation understood, the word meanings understood, and the question and answers, you will be completely sorted. I'm pretty much sure about that as far as this particular story is concerned. Tata, bye bye, goodbye.